When you study processors separately, you're usually told that there are three sets of wires or three buses. One of them is called the control bus, which it means that those wires carry control signals. And obviously the other two buses, the address bus would be the ones that carry address and data bus would be the ones that carry data. But when you study the processors in the context of a computer, things change a bit. As an example, this layout is some representation of the motherboard of IBM PC 5150, and I expect you that you understand this schematic at the end of this lecture. It would be so useful if you memorize this in understanding the machine cycles and also how instructions would work in detail. But first, let's have a look at the motherboard at the wire level. So we have two address bus and two data bus. Apart from the control bus, we have two address bus and two data bus in this motherboard. One of them, when 8088 generates the addresses on A0 to A19, those wires would travel through one set of latches. LS373 is just like 8282. The output would follow the input when G is high and OE is 0. And it would be separated the moment one of those conditions change. In this case, we say the moment that G goes low. In this case, we say that the input is latched in the output. So the A0 to A19 would be passed through one set of those latches. The reason that I say one set of those latches is because we have three latches. Each one of them is only 8 bits long, so we need three latches. Therefore, the output we call A0 to A19, and I have drawn it with the yellow wire. These yellow wires would eventually travel to go through two multiplexers to generate the addresses that would be connected to the address pins on the RAM. So we say the yellow bus, which means the address pins, the addresses that the processor generates and goes through one set of latches, they go to the RAM. They are used to address RAM only. The second one, the second address bus, is the orange bus that I've shown with the orange color to distinguish them from the first buses. These outputs are the same pins, the same address pins on the processor, but they go through two latches. So if they go through only one set of latches, these three, they create these yellow buses. The orange bus is only 13 of these yellow wires going through another latch. LS244 is just another unidirectional latch like LS373. We have 245 which we call them bidirectional transceivers. So this orange bus, these orange wires are connected to the address pins of the RAM, but only 13 of them, meaning orange wires are the same as the yellow buses or yellow wires, with the only difference that they travel through another latch, and also they are only 13 wires. Why do we have only 13? These orange wires also have another job, and that is used for programming the input-output chips. The input-output devices, the input-output chips, they have two states, programming and operation. These wires are used to program those chips. Now, why do we have only 13 wires? Is because we have 8K ROMs. We know that using 13 bits or 13 bits is enough to address all 8K memory cells. So if we zoom in on this RAM and their pin diagrams, we see that they are actually 24 pins. 13 of them are the address pins, which the orange wires, the 13 orange wires coming from the processor after going through two latches would be connected to them, would select one of them, and the data would go on the data bus if the chip select is activated. The other two are VCC and ground. You would see later how these chip select wires, these red wires, are created later. So we also have two data buses, which I have shown them. I have distinguished them with the green wire and also the brown wire. We know that 8 pins, the data bus of the 8088 is 8 bits long. So AD0 to AD7, they go through one 245 transceiver to create these wires. Then if they go through this 245 transceiver, they create the green wires which are connected, the 8 bits which are connected to the data pins of the RAM. They are also used for programming the input-output chips. When we want to program input-output chips, as would be explained later, the address of those chips would be generated by the processor. They would go through two latches, two sets of latches to create this orange bus. This would be connected, some of them would be connected to the address pins of those chips, would select a specific memory cell or register, while the data would be put by the processor on the data pins, would travel through two of these 245s, would go on this data bus that would travel to, would be connected to the data bus that is connected to input output chips. One example of this is the 8237 DMAC, that as we see, the green data bus is connected to the DB0 to DB7. Obviously, as would be explained later, these pins have different jobs in the programming and also in the operation. In operation, somehow they need to be separated from these that would be used for addressing and would eventually go to the yellow bus that would eventually go to the RAM, and the DMAC could work as a CPU itself by transferring data between memory and memory or memory and I/O. So this was one data bus. Right now, a lot of these things might seem complicated to you. Then the other data bus is the same data pins on the processor going through two other transceivers. One of them is obviously the same 245, but then they travel through another transceiver to create this brown wire. This brown wire are connected to the data pins of the RAM here. These brown wires are the same thing there. This latch is not actually another latch, it's just the same latch because I didn't have enough space. I have just drawn it here again to just remind myself that this is the same same chip, same transceiver one more time. So as you see, we have two addresses and two data bus. This is a simplified version of what I have already explained. The processor generates A0 to A19, that 8 of them are actually called AD0 to AD7 because they are multiplexed between both address and data. So these addresses would go through three latches or one set of LS373 to create another set of wires. These wires are called the yellow. I have shown them by the yellow color. They are the wires that go through RAM that I have put here. They also go through another set of latches, 2 to 4 far, or at least some of them would go through another chip to create what I have shown in as 13 bits to address the RAM. But RAM and ROM, they both have data pins as well. So some wires have to be connected to the data pins. In case of RAM, the reason is because so we could read from and also write to that RAM after this memory cell has been selected by the address bus coming from the processor and one set of latches. In case of RAM, the data pins are there so that we could read data off of RAM. We can't write to RAM. So the data bus are generated in here. As I said, this is just the summary of it. This data, 8 of these pins would go through one LS245, and if they go through another 245, they would create the wires that I've shown with brown color, and they go and travel to the data pins of the RAM. If they travel another 245, they would be the green bus, which is connected to the data bus of RAM. But notice that these green wires are also connected to the data bus to be used to program the input-output chips. The same thing applies about the orange here. These in the manual are called XD0 to XD7 and also XA0 to XA12.